Drowning Instinct, published in 2012 and written by Ilsa J. Bick, who you may know from the popular series Ashes, is a story founded on uncertainty. Ambiguity is what the author was intentionally striving for when she wrote it. The blurb of the novel, rather than telling you what it is, tells you what it is not. There are stories where the girl gets her prince and they live happily ever after. This is not one of those stories. There are stories where the monster gets the girl and everyone cries for his innocent victim. This is not one of those stories either. And there are stories where it's hard to be sure who's a prince and who's a monster, who is a victim and who should live happily ever after. These are the most interesting stories of all. The author, in her acknowledgements, states that her intent was to present a situation in which there are no stereotypical predators or victims. In my experience, the truly evil are few, and good people with the very best of intentions often make very bad decisions and get in way over their heads before they know it. This is a book about subverting expectations. This is a book about a 16-year-old girl who self-harms, who is drowning in her own vulnerability, who falls in love with her teacher, Mr. Anderson, who is a married man, who is so much older than her, who should be a textbook predator preying on her weaknesses. But is he? You can't tell. The lines are not only blurred, they don't seem to be there at all. But what Bick does really well in this novel, I found, was create suspense, and she does this in a really unique way. She creates suspense through the unreliability of her narrator, Jenna. There are two key elements to how Bick successfully does this. First, she makes you attached to Jenna. She makes you as a reader feel like you know Jenna. When I read it, it happened without me even realising it. Suddenly, I cared about what happened to this troubled, broken girl more than I had cared about any character I'd read so far that year. But Bick doesn't achieve this kind of attachment between character and reader by accident, and I will outline how she does this later. Secondly, once she's established a connection between the reader and her character, she throws you, to be cliché, a curveball. One big realisation, one big lightbulb moment, that not only makes you worry for Jenna even more, but shocks you. When I was reading the novel the first time, it was one of those moments in which I had to close the book and sit for a moment to process what had just happened. This event, this second tool Bick employs, changes the entire way you view Jenna, what Jenna is telling you, and what is happening. Suddenly, everything you have come to believe is true about Jenna is unravelled, and you start to question, what else is she not seeing correctly? Because it is not a matter of Jenna lying to you. That would not create the kind of deep worry that Bick wants you to have for her. It is that this is how Jenna sees the world. This is what she knows. The big event makes you realise that what Jenna knows is not what is actually happening. When, in fact, is she seeing things as they are, and when is she seeing things in the frame of her reality, and not the actual reality? Then, after this key event, Bick continues to build intensity. You learn more things about Jenna, more things about Mr. Anderson, more things about the dynamic of their relationship. Yet you are still reeling, because you do not know how much of this is true, and how much of this is conflated in Jenna's torn mind. But you care about her. Before Bick shifts the entire fabric of the story, she makes you care so deeply about Jenna that it doesn't matter if she's deliberately lying to you. You want her to be okay. This culminates in an intense climax and an ambiguous yet satisfying conclusion to the story. This technique, chiefly, is all about making your reader go on an emotional roller coaster with your character. To scare your reader, confuse them, confront them, upset them, excite them. The events in this story are shocking and affecting not because they happen, but because they happen to Jenna. So the first way that she does this, the first way she builds the suspense, is to make you attached to her narrator, 16-year-old Jenna Lord. She does this mostly through point of view and voice, and the key points for a POV approach are context, first-person narration, past tense recounting, colloquial sayings and personalisation, and a conversational tone. You begin the book with a passage in third person, introduced to a detective and a girl. At this early stage, the reader is removed from Jenna. We see Jenna from the outside as the detective sees her. This passage is actually the end of the book. Bick, before indulging us in Jenna's complete story, shows us the big picture. She also gives us an opening to meet Jenna. The detective gives her a digital recorder with which to report her story, instead of having to talk to his face. It is this story that she tells into the recorder that we are given access to. The important part here is that Bick gives the reader a reason as to why the narrator is telling their story, a context behind the narrative, so you understand that Jenna is telling her story to the police, but you don't yet know why the police are involved. You assume that something bad has happened to Jenna. You're the victim here, Detective Bob says to her. He stresses that word, victim, reminding her as if she's unsure. So we immediately know that the story we're about to hear is complex at best, heartbreaking at worst. Jenna is automatically placed in the position of victim and innocent by the detective, so you believe her. There is a reason this story is being told, a person it is being told to, and that person within the story is the detective, but within your experience of the novel is you. First-person narration is used to establish closeness to the character and an immediacy. This also allows for the unreliability of information and shocking nature of the key event that shifts the narrative, as we receive the story as told by Jenna herself. We think her thoughts, feel her feelings, her fear, her confusion. We feel angry on her behalf when we discover what happened with the fire that burned her. She hates her family, so we hate her family. We feel protective over her. Again, she's the victim. She's innocent. Shouldn't Mr. Anderson be the villain? But are her parents the real villains, ignoring her needs for their own careers, tearing her away from her counsellor and relocating her without asking what she thinks, just because they're tired of the burden of the bad image they get for their daughter being so mentally hurt? It is her own grandfather, after all, who is responsible for the fire that she gets severely burnt in as a child. Mr. Anderson is the only person who will tell her the truth about her brother, who makes her feel worthy, loved, cared for. It's Mr. Anderson who speaks with her parents. He convinces them to allow her a car and a phone, to have some independence. It's Mr. Anderson who convinces them that independence is the first step to her being normal again, that until she's allowed control and to make decisions for herself, she won't heal. It is Mr. Anderson who gives her a reason to indulge her passion again, of cross-country running. And it's Mr. Anderson who makes her feel like she's worth being alive. But he's married. He's in his 30s. Is a romantic relationship what Jenna needs from him? Is he being immoral, irresponsible, selfish? You know that he and Jenna cannot remain together long term. Not only are readers asked these questions, we feel them through Jenna as we experience her deepest thoughts and feelings. Jenna is a character with so many surreal flaws and characteristics. So many extremes are contained within the one girl, and it could almost be too much for a reader to relate to her. However, Bick highlights the normality of this girl too. In the first chapter, this is what Bick writes. D. So, Bob, I can tell. I can tell plenty. But the truth? I don't know what that is. I thought I knew until this afternoon, but now... Even if I tell my version of the truth, then what? I'll go back to being the old me? Well, what kind of a future is that? Because let me tell you about the old me, Bob, the beta version of Jenna Lord. Here's how beta Jenna thinks. They let me go, and I'll cut. Walk out of this room and into the waiting arms of Psycho Dad, and I'll cut. Together, we'll visit my crispy critter of a mother, who's a drunk and wants only the best for me. And I'll cut. I'll cut. I'll cut. Yeah, going back to being better Jenna makes the truth just so attractive. E. The truth. Well, the year I was 15 completely sucked. Considering I've died twice, that's really saying something. I was a month shy of sweet 16 when I started my sophomore year at Turing, this science techie school just outside Milwaukee for brainiacs, which I'm supposed to be. Skipped a grade, tested out of classes, yada yada. It goes without saying that I'm a straight A+ student, a quiet kid, sort of a loser, and the kind of girl no one would ever suspect. Or notice. Okay, other stuff. Well, my cell phone is pink. I'm a very careful driver. I've never kissed a boy, which feels wrong, because I am sweet 16, the age when a girl is supposed to find her prince and settle down. I used to pretend I was Ariel. I had the doll and a blue gown for dress-up, like in the movie. I was wearing the dress the night we first met, Bob, although you probably don't remember that because by then I'd died a couple of times. The dress was only so much ash, and there was kind of a lot going on. Here, not only do we see the real Jenna, the broken, hurting Jenna, we see the normal one too. She has a pink phone, she can drive a car, she used to dress up as Disney princesses. Bick also includes rhetorical questions. In addressing Bob, she's addressing you, asking you to engage with the story and think of an answer. We also hear about the fire, the graphic descriptions of the pain. When they shocked me to life, I blazed back into this huge supernova. Fire hot enough to fry skin and melt fat ignites pain too. Constant and agonising and so bad you can't die fast enough. I wanted to scream at the doctors to stop, but I was mute. The fire had scorched my lungs and boiled my voice. And then there is the pain of fire, molten and alive, the swirl of flames streaming over rotten wood and naked flesh. That pain moves when you move. It mutters between every breath. It spikes your ears. It rips. You think pain can't be any more horrible than that. Until you discover that the well is bottomless. There's always more. A different kind of pain, maybe. But more and much, much worse. But that would be getting ahead of myself. Here, we also see how Jenna alludes to what is to come. The pain can get worse, but that is getting ahead of herself. What, then, is to come? This closeness of voice and the personal addresses to the reader, the calls to engage with the story and this painful vulnerability Jenna encompasses, all create a story in which you, as a reader, invest in Jenna. You care. Past tense, paired with the first-person narration, gives a sense of truth as these events have already happened. As Jenna recounts her story into the recorder, you feel like she's telling you all the secrets about her life. And really, that is exactly what she is doing. Additionally, offhand sayings and personal nicknames such as Psycho Dad and Bobby O, in reference to her father and the detective, respectively, cause you as the reader to see these people as Jenna does. Her father is immediately labelled Psycho, and the detective is addressed casually, almost jokingly. Jenna doesn't take him seriously. And lastly, her tone is very conversational. She uses phrases like yada yada, but then she dishes out some graphic lyrical descriptions of the fire. The casual moments and those serious moments balance each other out, so as a reader you never once get tired of either approach. Through a series of deliberate narrative choices, Bick cultivates a connection between the reader and the narrator that is entirely infallible. It is this that makes the second step in Bick's creation of tension and suspense so exquisitely effective. Throughout the novel, we see Jenna struggle for control. To her, Mr. Anderson represents her safe place. By the time I unlocked the door, the kissing knife was hidden too, snuggled right next to that pair of nail scissors behind my vanity. Knowing the kissing knife was there, that I got away with it, that I could get at that knife, hold it, carry it, touch it whenever I wanted, that I had a real piece of a memory, of Mr. Anderson caring about me, of a safe place. That wasn't all bad. It was good, Bob. It felt good. Because it was mine, Bob. It was mine. In this scene, she has just locked herself in the bathroom. She is not allowed to lock doors because her parents are constantly hovering, never giving her a chance to cut, with the knife she has stolen from Mr. Anderson's desk. She sees Mr. Anderson as her safe place, her sanctuary, and in her own Jenna way, the knife is the symbol of this. She has the knife, she can cut if she wants to, but will she? Here, we really get to experience her psyche, her perspective on herself and those around her, and we believe her. But then, 2/3 of the way in, as Mr. Anderson and Jenna's relationship becomes closer and closer, the big thing that changes everything happens. Up until this point, we are told about her brother Matt, who carried her out of her grandpa's burning house, who looked out for her. He enlisted and went overseas with the army, but Jenna emails him all the time. We read the emails. Jenna writes more emails. He replies. And then, because he was facing me now, leaning forward, face intent, his eyes grabbing mine so I couldn't look away. We were like matching bookends, almost touching, but with volumes between us and stories. So many stories. Because I am your friend, and I do care, much more than I should. Then you'd stop talking about this. You'd stop. No, Jenna, honey, I can't. I wouldn't be your friend if I did. Why not? Because he cradled my face in his hands. Because Matt's dead, Jenna. And I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'm sorrier than you can ever know. But he's dead, and has been for more than 2 years. This isn't just shocking because of her grief, but because up until this point, she has honestly managed to convince herself and us that Matt is alive and corresponding with her. In the thick of the story, this is one thing you can rely on. One character who doesn't seem to have dubious motives towards Jenna. When Mr. Anderson tells Jenna this, it changes the nature of all the relationships Bick has built within the story up until this point. Mr. Anderson and Jenna, you and Jenna, Jenna and Matt, Jenna and her parents, Jenna and the story she is telling you. Matt is dead, but he seems so alive, and Jenna has successfully tricked herself, while Bick has successfully tricked you. From this point on you wonder, what other truths has Jenna managed to convince herself of? Are there truths there that Mr. Anderson sees, like Matt's death, but chooses not to tell her? What else does Jenna refuse to tell herself? You can no longer trust a single word she says, yet you still love her. You still keep reading and keep believing in her, but you question. With this technique, it is important to make sure the reader feels protective of the character and worries for the character before you do this, or else they will not care when the event unfolds and may lose interest. Instead of making the impact needed to build the tension and progress the story closest to its ultimate climax, you will undo everything you have achieved up until that point. The rest of the story relies on the impact created here to be used as a catalyst. If step 1 is not completed successfully, step 2 will not work, and suspense is lost because you will be left with the reader who isn't at all bothered by it. Following these steps, it is crucial to maintain the tempo. Unreliability of narration is often used to diffuse situations, to relieve tension, to distract from what is actually happening. But because Jenna's unreliability comes from how she sees the world, and not from her deliberately telling us lies, this, married with how deeply Bick makes you care about her, only builds the tension and creates suspense. The most important thing Bick does here is not waste all the effort she's gone to in the first half of the novel. She forges that attachment between her reader and narrator. She unleashes the unexpected, shocking realization. But then she maintains the pressure. She keeps the story moving with added stresses and realizations, and she raises the stakes. When Jenna and Mr. Anderson end up on top of the frozen lake, drowning a very real possibility, Jenna questioning Mr. Anderson, and then in turn questioning everything about herself, you reach the culmination of the tension that is built up throughout the novel. Their lives are literally at stake, and you are screaming for Jenna to be okay. You want to protect her. Now, to explore this technique further, I have employed the initial stage as the first step in a creative piece. In this, I strove to demonstrate the initial setup that Bick has with Jenna, provide a context for the story, include the first-person narration with past tense recounts, give my character some relatability and common points of interest, describe little snippets of whatever pain she's experiencing to make the reader feel for her, and to utilise the casual tone of voice to make readers feel at ease. So this is the beginning of what would end up being a much longer, more complex story, in which a girl has to figure out who she is in amidst a great deal of confusion and a great deal of pain. I actually wrote what would be an entire first chapter, however I will only read the first 600 words of it now. They told me to write it all down. They told me, hey, maybe this will be easier. You like English. They told me a lot of things, like how they understand how difficult this is, how they've seen other girls before be nowhere near as strong as you are. Like, that makes me feel better. Like, knowing that other girls are more messed up than I am makes me feel just so damn cheery about life. There's truly nothing like telling a survivor who didn't want to survive that the only way to feel better about themselves and validate their worth is to compare it to that of other girls, who are comparatively more upset and more fragile and more unable to recall the events that led to their shattering, and therefore not as good at being a model victim. Those girls are just the worst, I'd said. Maybe. I can't really remember. What I do remember is telling them that I didn't write, so tough luck, suckers. They laughed, told me my sense of humour was cute. They really don't want to know what happened the last time someone told me I was cute. One day, I was at the mall with my mum, like any self-respecting 10-year-old would be, and this girl, she was at the register, and I was buying a Cinderella costume, because Cinderella was into shoes and I was into shoes, so we were an obvious match, and she thought I was just too cute to eat like I was what, a cake? Anyway, there's just something about that word. I took advantage of my last opportunity to be a tantrum thrower and caused a damn riot. That was my first trip to Dr. Sanders, or Mary. That's what she wanted me to call her, Mary. She was literally named Mary Sue. For some reason, that always made me laugh. They told me to write this as if I was speaking to them. But what am I supposed to write? Dear them, you can't help me. Sincerely, the girl who doesn't give a damn anymore. I'm sure you'd appreciate that, right, them? But I suppose I have no choice. You have my prince, them. You have my prince. I'm screwed. I have no choices left to make but this one, to tell you the truth, or at least the version of it that can be put into words in a dodgy old Coles 50-cent notebook. You gave me an entire packet of pens, all blue, like you must know how many times I'm going to have to write something and then scribble it out again. You could have just given me a computer, but I suppose then you'd worry about what I'd find. There are only so many things you know to lock me out of. Like, but where do I start? Where do you want me to start? With the way she looked at me, or soft hair and brown eyes and pudgy cheeks? The way she held my hand and told me things that I actually believed. Things like she loved me. Things like I was going to be okay. Things that no one else was able to convince me were true. Or do you want me to start with that first Facebook comment? That first assault? Your mum's a whore, they said, just like you. There were photos, too, of her, of my mum. She was dead, though, I could tell. I don't think the photo sharers knew that yet. They didn't know that at that point her heart had already stopped beating. No, she was just a woman lying face down in a car park, booty shorts and torn bra, blood underneath her fingernails. So to conclude this, I'll recap the main elements of Bick's technique. Number one is the attachment to the narrator through the use of deliberate point of view choices, like context, first person narration, past tense recounting, colloquial sayings and personalization, and conversational tone. And the second is that this all leads up to a big event. So once the reader is attached to the narrator, you upset the entire narrative and then raise the stakes. And you keep raising the stakes so that tension and suspense will be built. And the tension and suspense is more impactful because you care about the character so much and you've created such an attachment to the character. Thank you.